Hello, this is Jeremy Webster with Collector's Maze, and I am here with Stephen E. Gordon, film director, animator, artist, character designer, and all of the awesome things all rolled into one. Stephen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
What you got going on?
What do I have going on right now? Just working, basically. I am just finished up a couple of cons a week or so ago, and I don't have any other cons coming up until December at this point, unless I do San Diego. But basically just working full time. Got my day gig, which is storyboarding and doing some expression sheets and stuff for another company, and then working on a comic in the evenings and stuff, and some commissions that are still backlogged on. So I'm kind of busy, but not specifically with anything worthy of note or anything. So,
But busy is good, particularly given the last couple of years, right?
yep. Oh yeah.
So I saw you got your start with Ralph Bakshi. I mean, a
Mhm.
real renegade.
Congratulations, you're one of the few that pronounced his name right.
Well, I have seen a few Bakshi movies in my time. How do they usually pronounce it? Bakshi, probably.
Bakshi, yeah.
Bakshi.
I
Yeah.
have to make the decision whether to correct someone or to go on.
So you really got your start on Lord of the Rings?
Yep.
What was that like?
Oh, it was interesting. I was just 17 at the time, so it was very weird. I mean, I kind of thought it would just be like a cool summer job or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned into a career, so it was kind of nice. But it was, I mean, for him, that was a very big production. I had no idea one way or the other, of course, but that was a really expensive production where he was just hiring left and right. Anyone who could find that could hold a pencil almost was getting a job there, so he could make his way through the film. So I was lucky enough to be in actually the first wave of newbies that he hired, people that didn't have a clue about animation. So
Yeah.
I got in there, and then I kind of slowly happened to be in the right place at the right time when they wanted to try something different, and I was available and finished up work, and so I could move on to the next phase of my career. So
If I remember right, that was a really ambitious production.
yeah, it was, especially for the day. I mean, no one else wanted to touch it, and Ralph was probably the only one crazy enough to try it, and then try it in animation. Initially, I think he was going to try to do it in traditional animation, and then he even did some tests on it. And I think you can see some of the tests occasionally on his Facebook page or things like that. But eventually, he figured out, and rightly so, that the only way to get through it all would be to rotoscope it. Shoot live action first, and then have the animators go over it, kind of the traditional way that Disney used to do quite a bit of work and stuff. So.
Yeah, didn't they have rotoscope work going all the way back to Snow White?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, Disney wasn't the first one to use it. The Fleischer, I don't know if you familiar with the Fleischer
Yeah,
Studios and stuff.
Superman and the Popeye, and
yeah, and they did Gulliver and stuff. I mean, Disney, I think, was the first one to use it in a feature animated film with Snow White. But yeah, it's been going on for decades and decades until they pretended not to know what anyone was talking about when someone brought up rotoscope. So.
And then you went on to Fire and Ice. Did you get to work with like Rosetta himself?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't from Lord of the Rings to Fire and Ice, but Fire and Ice, it wasn't quite that quick. But yeah, I did work on Fire and Ice as the animation supervisor and one of the key animators, and helped the model designs and whatnot. And yes, I worked with Rosetta. It wasn't a day in and day out, because he was maybe in once a week or something.
Yeah.
What if that? But yeah, I got to go back and forth with him a little bit and work and talk with him and stuff. So
That had to be an amazing experience.
yeah, I mean, probably more so in retrospect than at the time. So, the time it was just like, yeah, this is crazy. Yeah, it's just busy. Because that, unlike Lord of the Rings, Fire and Ice was a really cheap production.
Yeah.
And it was just every all hands on deck. Every man had to do multiple tasks, or every person, every artist, and it was just nuts. Really low budget and fast schedule.
Yeah, I think it's kind of one of those things I would mention to the audience that Ralph Bakshi was sort of very sort of, we say renegade.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much a renegade animator who came up, whereas we had Disney and studios such as that sort of saw animation as very much a children's fare. Bakshi approached it differently. He thought that animation could be a medium that could reach out across all age spectrums. Yeah, and
especially at the time. I mean, it was Disney and TV.
Yeah,
that was it. And then Ralph was coming in from completely a different angle and saying, I'm going to make films for adults. So, and not crappy, cheesy porn stuff, but, just really deep stuff. I mean, by the time he started doing Lord of the Rings, he had already kind of hit a more of a mainstream adult level. But if you look at his films before that, from Fritz to Heavy Traffic to Coonskin and stuff, those are real innovative storytelling and deep, heavy underground films. So,
yeah, there's something. I've seen several of them, and they're very entrenched in the counterculture of the time.
Yeah,
and they're really marvelous to go back and visit, because I think that it's important, particularly today's anime audiences should have some appreciation for it, because he was treading those lines long before those things came down the pike.
Yeah, absolutely.
And his work is definitely worth checking out in that angle. How long did you work with Bakshi?
Boy, obviously from Lord of the Rings all the way up through Cool World. I mean, it wasn't, working consistently with him. Anytime he'd get a job or something, or a project, I'd go back over and work with him. But so it was quite a few decades. I would put a number on that specifically, and I even worked with him a little bit after Cool World. Even when he was recently doing his Kickstarter a few years ago, we were talking, and I was going to help him animate on that. And the timing just didn't work. Where I started the scene and I just couldn't put any time into it, and so I ended up having to bail on it, unfortunately. But, always like Ralph, and always be glad to help him and work again on stuff with him.
It'd be nice to see him make kind of a comeback in this era.
Yeah, I don't think that's likely to happen. I think he's very much happy in retirement and doing his paintings and relaxing and stuff. So
you guys certainly opened up an alley for a lot of other animators coming down the line.
Oh yeah, a lot of good people came through his studios. So he loved artists, and he loved finding new artists and stuff, and he put a lot of people on the map, or brought them in, and that eventually landed on the map. The Bruce Timms, the Andrew Pixar guy, Andrew Adamson. No, that's not his name. Well, whatever. The guy who directed John Carter and Finding Nemo. I can't think of his name now.
Oh yeah. So, name's not getting me either, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so he's done a lot of artists floating around in the business. Started at Bakshi. So.
Well, you were really involved in sort of the early wave of Marvel, not like the 60s wave, but when they started picking up steam, like in the early 2000s. Like you were said you were a director and character design on the first Ultimate Avengers movie.
Yeah, that was after Evolution. But my first Marvel project was X-Men Evolution, and then I went on and worked on Ultimate Avengers, the first two. I was director on the first one, and then character designer and only character designer on the second one. I kind of left and went off and did something else on when they're doing Ultimate Avengers too. But occasionally I'd do storyboards and stuff for them on other projects, those directed videos. And then I worked on Wolverine and The X-Men as a director. So X-Men
Evolution was quite a series. For the viewers who aren't familiar with it, it was a 4-season, if I remember right, 4-season series right after, if I want to say correctly, right after X2, was it the film, or was it after the first X-Men?
No, the first season was being worked on simultaneously with X-Men, the first movie.
Really?
In fact, I'm sure that's why it was being made, is to kind of capitalize on the movie, hoping to come out and glean some of the audience that hopefully saw the movie and would then watch the TV, or vice versa. But in fact, a lot of the design work, well, we were kind of asked to follow some of their designs from the movie. Like if you look at the Professor X's chair in X-Men Evolution, it's the same chair.
Yeah.
But that was about all they would give us. We were not allowed to see any of their designs for the movie. I think they showed us Cyclops' street glasses, and that was about it. Oh, they told us which ones it would be or something, what Oakleys they were using.
Yeah.
But everything else was kind of like, well, we kind of like what you're doing with Sabretooth, but could you put him in an overcoat? Okay. Why? Because we put him in a, well, can I see what you did? No. So I had to come up with something on my own, figure out, okay, I'll put him in an overcoat, but I don't know what you did.
Wait a minute, but was it the 90s sort of Spawn thing where everybody had overcoats? Everyone was dark and brooding in an alley with an overcoat.
Yeah, no idea. I mean, obviously, figure, okay, they're going for that flapping split overcoat or something. But, I tore the sleeves off it. But they had no idea what they were doing.
Which gave him a bit of a punk feel, with the torn off sleeves.
Yeah.
But how did you end up on that show?
Well, I had been friends with the producer, the guy, Bard Kirkland, who'd been hired to produce it for years and years.
Right.
And we had just worked together previously at a studio called Saban. We were both working on different projects, and at that point, he was being offered as Saban to produce the Avengers show that they had going there that was in serious need of revamping and everything else. So he wanted me to be one of the directors and and we do all the character designs on that. So before that happened, and I don't think they ever went on with the second season of that Avengers show. He got the offer to work on this show for Marvel, X-Men Evolution. It wasn't called that then. And so he asked if I wanted to come over and work on it. And so it worked out nicely. And whenever he had a gig, I'd usually end up on it or something. So.
And I was looking at the prints on your site, and there was a really great print that you have on there where it's a number of members of X-Men Evolution's cast that are posed like on the original poster for the Breakfast Club.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a wonderful encapsulation of that show, because, and as someone who read X-Men in the 90s, who read a lot of Marvel in the 90s and such, if you go back to the early Claremont, even before that, they were very much teenagers. It was very much a contemporary teenage issues book that had superpower sort of standing in for the regular teenage type issues. And one thing is, when they hit the movie, there was a little element of that with Rogue, but it was very, very superhero. But the show Evolution, you guys cycled back to them as being kids, coming to terms with their abilities and such. So given that you guys are working sort of in parallel with the film, sort of a sort of twin thing going on in a different media type, what was the decision making to bring that back to them being kids?
Well, I think they wanted to differentiate it from the movie and from the previous series. Initially, when it was broached, it was jokingly talked about as X-Men babies. At that time, everything was doing the whole Muppet Babies spin on everything. That time Muppet Babies had been big, and so suddenly everyone was doing a baby version of their traditional show or whatever. And so that's initially what we thought it was going to be, but thankfully that's not what it was. They wanted to just the babies idea was just like, well, they're not adults. So, but the whole idea of putting them into school and stuff was great. We loved that idea. In fact, there was a comic going on concurrently at that time called Children of the Atom.
Oh, okay.
That was doing sort of the same idea. That, in fact, for a long time, we were thinking that would be the name, is Children of the Atom. But I think we got dissuaded from that because they wanted to somehow put X-Men in the title. They thought people wouldn't know what that was. So
Children of the Atom would have been an awesome subtitle for that show.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the working idea that we all had in our minds because of that comic. And we thought, well, it's Marvel. They wouldn't mind us using that title. But, I guess that would have meant we would have had to follow their story a little closer or something possibly. But, so we came up with something different and unique. It took us a little while to kind of get our feet under us and stuff. We suffered from some initial weak writing and stuff in the first episodes, and we had to kind of figure out where we stood on it. And Boyd, had to decide how much he wanted to take control of it. And eventually he took a lot of control and worked with the network Kids WB people, and they decided where it was going to go, and they followed through on it. And thankfully, Marvel wasn't all that involved at the time. They really didn't care that much what we did. They wanted to use it as sort of a way to sell the movie, or to, go tangent on the movie, and to sell toys. The whole deal of essentially at the beginning was they would sell their toys during the commercials for the show and stuff. And they did create a bunch of X-Men toys, but they could never figure out how to sell the toys. And so that all kind of went bottom up. So, and part of the problem was at that point, Marvel was also Toy Biz.
Yeah.
And Toy Biz was barely treading water at that time. And part of it had to do with the fact that KB Toys, which was their big outlet at that time, where they sold most of their stock through, was being taken over by corporate pirates. And so that kind of hurt them even further. It's a whole mess. But,
of course. Yeah, I remember those. I remember they had the Marvel Legends series, Toy Biz did back. Heck, I had Batman figures from the Tim Burton movie that were Toy Biz.
Yeah, no, they were big toy manufacturers, but they'd also bought Marvel, I think. They were the owners of Marvel, or the guy who owned Toy Biz, J.R.R, became the big CEO of Marvel or something like that. I'm not sure the exact titles and stuff. So. But
big enough. He was big enough to get credits in the Spider-Man movies. I remember that.
Yeah. Well, he probably set the initial deals in the Sony deal before Marvel kicked him to the curb too, I think. So.
Yeah. So you moved from X-Men Evolution over to the Ultimate Avengers.
Yeah, not immediately, but yeah, that was my next Marvel project, because Boyd Kirkland had developed this with a series of director-videos with Craig Kyle, who I don't know if you know who he is, but he was the guy who created X-23, and he was our co-producer on the last season, or maybe the last two seasons of X-Men Evolution.
Okay.
So him and Boyd got together and they came up with this idea of doing these films, and so he called me over to direct and do character design. At that point, he knew he wanted me to do character design. At the beginning of X-Men Evolution, I wasn't really hired as character designer. I was hired to do direction. And me and the other directors and Boyd and everyone else just kind of jumped in and started trying to develop the stuff. And everyone was throwing everything against the wall, and eventually Boyd decided that my stuff was what he liked best and wanted to go with, and thought that I could best be utilized in that direction as well as the directing. So
I think that when that one dropped, the Ultimate Avengers thing, I had read the comic, whatever it was, the one that Brian Hitch and had written, the Ultimate Avengers. And while it was really good, and it was a hot thing at the time, that whole Ultimates thing was.
Sure.
It it was really neat to see these old sort of Marvel concepts, their characters updated in such a way. I mean, there are debates to this day on some of the character updates, like the general attitude of the Hulk, say, in the comic is wow, he's very Jekyll and Hyde. But the when you guys did the animated version, it's like everything clicked in that. It's like you modernized sort of the look along with kind of what the comic was doing, but you sort of found a way to work around the darker character aspects of the comic to make it feel like an old, an Avengers story.
Yeah, I mean, things like Hank being a wife beater in the comic.
Oh wow, yeah.
We took that out, but we did make him just kind of a douchebag in our version.
Because I had a friend at the time who had been in a domestic abuse situation when she was like a child, and she had read the comic, and I want to say it was at the end of the 6th issue, where she turns miniature and he sprays her with bug spray. This was just totally horrific to her because he's one of the heroes. Like, this isn't something that should happen in this comic. And that's a big, that's a big topic in itself that probably isn't something we should go into. But it was amazing to see that the modernization of the Avengers blended with something that felt like an Avengers story. Not to say that story wasn't good, but it was something that needed to live on its own space.
Obviously we were lifting off of the Hitch Millar comic, but we wanted to kind of make it a little more user-friendly, I guess. not go too controversial. So
right. We used to have evenings, my son and I did, because he was way little at the time. He's going to graduate high school this year, so all the pangs of nostalgia and whatnot. But we would have nights where we would pop in the Ultimate Avengers movies. They were so good. and watch them back to back. Where did you end up going to after Ultimate Avengers?
Oh boy. Well, Marvel wise, then we worked on Wolverine and the X-Men. Same. Boyd once again was the producer of that, and I guess that was a show that had been in development and started before we got on it, and they were just having trouble getting it moving. So they ended up removing the original crew and putting Boyd in, and he brought me in, and tried to bring in some other people from past shows and stuff. But so we had to kind of work our way through that one, and that one was kind of a fun experience because that was the first time we actually. I mean, it doesn't mean anything to probably you or the viewers, but used to be in the day before that show, when you do direct and do storyboards, you just do it all on paper. And then the first time you'd actually see anything cut together in film was when the color came back. But now that was like the advent of animatics, pencil test animatics.
All right.
For TV. They used to do it in film all the time, features all the time, but in TV it was like, well, that's an expense, no one wants it. But I guess the executive figured out that they really didn't know they couldn't tell what they were getting by flipping through these stacks of storyboards.
Yeah.
Stuff. So they agreed to pop for the expensive animatics. So we got to actually create animatics. And so it was kind of a nice way to go. And to me, I liked that a lot because it gave you a chance to rework things before it got too far along. And it was more cost effective and everything else. So.
Right. So it might be basically it might have been a larger cost up front, which is why they hadn't used it further. But ultimately, it was a better thing in the long run.
I think that's probably the case. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've got a lot of film work to your credit too. I've seen the Swan Princess.
Yep, that's that X-Men Evolution and the Swan Princess are what I'm really well known for when I go to this Comic Cons and stuff. So,
how did you get the deal on the Swan Princess?
Oh, I've been working with Rick Rich, who's the director producer on Swan Princess, for years and years. I started with him when I was at Disney on the Black Cauldron. He was one of the directors on the Black Cauldron.
Yeah.
And so I was on his crew for most of the time on that production. And then when he left to go start his own studio. He called me over to start doing some freelance for him occasionally, and then storyboards and some character design work. And we did a shitload of direct to videos for a studio, a company called Nest Productions, I think, or something like that. And we, a lot of them were history, a lot of them were religious, just a miscellany of all types of videos. We must have done 30, 40 videos or something, direct to videos. And the entire time, he was trying to get a project going. We were working on this type of project, that type of project, a feature project. And eventually, the people that were funding the videos, direct to videos, agreed to fund a feature for him. And it was Swan Princess. So, I was already there working with him. And it's just a matter of me kind of shifting gears and going into feature mode.
Right.
So,
Like,
nice deal.
When you approach it as a sort of visual artist, and you're doing you're kind of going from television to a feature film, how does the thinking change?
Well, there's more time in feature, generally speaking, to think about things. You don't have to, in TV or direct to videos, it's pretty much one and done. You don't have a lot of time to second guess yourself. You have to make your decisions right away and live with them, or try to find a cute way to fix them after the fact. In features, you can rework and rework as long as there's money and schedule to do that. And there's usually a lot more so than in TV. So it's kind of a nice way to work. Doing character designs on, say, Ultimate Avengers. I mean, I probably, each character maybe had 1 or 2 passes, maybe 3 occasionally. On Swan Princess, I must have gone through, some of the characters may have had 6 to a dozen passes as a character designer. And then it's the same thing for animation and stuff. When you're animating on TV stuff, first off, rarely do you animate here on TV stuff. You usually ship it overseas and you get back what you get back, and you try to fix it if you can. But on features, you do pencil tests, you get to look at it and study it, and you get to critique it. I was the animation supervisor on that, so I was critiquing everyone's animation and pointing out things that needed fixing or approving it or whatnot. So it's just a whole different frame of mind, and not that one is better than the other necessarily, they're just different. So
We're on a number of different hats: director, character design, animator, and such. Which is your favorite field to work in?
Well, if I had my choice, directing, because then you have the most control over numerous things under you. Then you can tell other people what to do. But because I fancy myself a storyteller. And I like to be able to control what the story is and the pacing of that story and what's going on and stuff. Whereas, some of the other things, you basically, the creative control is nominal. It's like, I can make a decision about whether that character is wearing high heels or flats, maybe, but then someone else can come in and tell me to change it. Whereas, director, I'm usually, there's not that many more people above you to tell you what to do. So, there's producers and such and people, the money people, but you've got more control of the people below you. So,
one of the guys I saw that you worked with that is one of my personal favorites. You got to work on a number of Don Bluth productions.
Not specifically. I worked on Anastasia doing freelance. I was here, they were in Arizona, and they needed someone to help, so they would send me scenes through the mail in those days, and I would get them and talk to someone on the phone and do them and send them back through the mail. Sometimes pencil tests or whatever through electronically and through the internet. That was about it. Whereas and the other project that you're probably thinking of was Titan AE.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see. When I was working on Titan AE, it was called Planet Ice, and Don Bluth was not involved. we were working, a group of us were working here at the same time he was working on Anastasia in Van Nuys. That doesn't mean anything to you probably, but Van Nuys, California, and they were in Arizona. And Fox, it was going to be Fox's second picture, animated film, which it was, but it was a whole different crew. Some of us eventually it imploded here. The people in charge, or the directors and whatnot, it didn't happen. And they looked around and said, well, Don is ready for his next feature, and we have this one that we'd like to finish. So they handed it all over to him. And he had a couple of people from here that worked on it, like Mike Plug and Hank Tucker. But I think generally speaking, it was mostly his crew. So I never worked on that for him. So
there's some crazy stories about the origins of that movie. Yeah. It's like, what do you believe and what you don't? There was a story that it started out as a live action movie and got moved over to animation.
No, I don't. Well, if that happened, it happened before I heard anything about it. When I was on it was always going to be animation. At one point, the director on it, Art Vitello, had envisioned it to be CG. He thought he could do it in CG. And I think his aspirations of CG it was way too early, a couple of decades too early to be doing a CG film like that.
That's one of the sort of crazy things that movie did. And I don't know. You had movies that were trying to incorporate CG with 2D elements, like Beauty and the Beast had some, but that movie tried to, like, the ships, if I remember right, were all 3D, but all the characters and the organics were all 2D. Like they were trying to make it part of a contiguous universe. It's a weird production to watch. Yeah.
They've been, in fact, the film I was on at Disney, Black Cauldron, I think was the first film to do that, where except it was all wireframe stuff that someone would then trace. But they, were moving like the boats and stuff, the little rafts and whatever the characters were using, and some of the wagons and stuff, they were doing those in CG. And then Great Mouse Detective was the next step up, where they actually did the interior of Big Ben in CG, except it wasn't CG. It was just, well, it was CG, but once again, someone took it and then redrew it all essentially, or they, removed all the things. They didn't have the ability to create real smooth CG in those days. And then I think it went from there to Oliver and Company that did the vehicles in CG. But once again, it wasn't what we know as CG these days, like Toy Story stuff, the Pixar. It was just, a use of a way to control it better without actually someone having to animate all that by hand. And then I think the same thing happened with Titan E, where they did the vehicles and such. I think that went up the next step of the ladder as far as look and stuff, where that was more shaded and had a little more interest to it than what we had been doing previously. But it's they've been trying to mesh it for a long time, and I don't know that it ever quite meshed. Obviously, Beauty and the Beast, that background, the ballroom dance was completely CG. I'm not quite sure entirely successful, but it did what it needed to do. So
it was what it was at the time.
Yeah.
And I think that particularly now with people come up with the Disney movies and whatnot, now the stuff that gets put out, but there's this weird sort of gap, if you will. Like there's the Snow White, there's the Cinderella, there's the Dalmatians and stuff, and somewhere along the line there's these mid gaps that sort of disappear from like I want to say like general public knowledge. You end up at the Little Mermaid or whatever, and then it starts again. But like you're saying, like Oliver and Company, Pete's Dragon, the Black Cauldron, all the Rescuers Down Under, a lot of movies.
Sure, Fox and the Hound, Aristocats. They had some very fallow times at Disney, and that was actually the time that Bakshi was coming in, around the Fox and the Hound time and stuff, where Disney was just like, oh God, this is just awful stuff. The Aristocats, Fox and the Hound, Robin Hood, just like, they had their charms and stuff, but there was really nothing spectacular going on there. It's just like, well, the wheels are turning, but they're not very greased, and they're not.
None of them are a Bambi or a Pinocchio. No.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, but you watch them. Like, for example, we picked up Robin Hood, but I can tell you the main reason we're going to watch it is to hum with the songs, because the songs in it are fantastic, but it like almost doesn't have a climax in a way.
No, it was just a bare retelling of the Errol Flynn Robin Hood.
Yeah.
And other than the fact that it started a real big furry movement, there's not much to, and it had some really good animation in it, some character stuff, but there's just nothing there. Story-wise, it's just really, I mean, I think Jungle Book was the only one from that period that had any really oomph to it.
That one had some teeth. Yeah, it hung around. Long enough to get spin-off cartoons in the 90s.
Yeah.
Proper ones, and the Tailspin, where they took the characters but they transplanted them in another universe entirely.
Yeah, that was pretty weird. But yeah, it was interesting that they did that. Yeah. Turned them into Indiana Jones and whatnot, or the Gold Monkey, or whatever. Yeah.
That was weird. When I remember seeing that, I think I was in high school at the time when that came out. I was like, how are they doing this? That's, it's like you're banking on the character in a way. And granted, Disney's done that for a lot of years, but this is an established universe you're playing with. Yeah. And apparently it worked for them.
Yeah. Well, it made the Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers almost look sane in comparison. It's like, okay, well that I can somehow justify, but the whole Baloo as a pilot thing is like, okay, now I'm really lost.
Yeah. Because like DuckTales, I got DuckTales because they had the comics.
Sure.
What Gladstone comics, I think it was, and it was Scrooge swims in the money. He's got the three twins, though in the comics they had Donald with them. So that one automatically I understood. Yeah. I've read this.
Plus those are short characters at best, anyways.
Yeah.
Same with Chip and Dale, short characters. Okay, it's like you can do whatever with them. Every short was different. Doesn't matter. So.
One film I'd be curious to know if you got to work on. Did you do anything with Bakshi's Wizards?
No, that was before my time. That's when I was in high school.
Oh.
So that was right before Lord of the Rings. And from that, I think that was him trying to show that he could do a Lord of the Rings in a way. He ended up not doing it quite the same way, but it was his stab at that type of storytelling and artwork and such. I mean, a couple of the people that worked on that also ended up on Lord of the Rings with the forerunners to help him on that and stuff. So,
yeah, I've never got to see the whole film, but the art is so striking for that movie.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to look at.
And just like in Fire and Ice, he did a whole prologue section in that. And in fact, it may have been interstitials. It's been a long time since I've seen it, and I don't know if you're familiar with Mike Plug.
Yes,
but he did all that stuff. So he did all those, little set pieces that they, would move the camera around on while there was narration going on and stuff. So
Plug was amazing.
Is
amazing.
He's still around.
Sorry. Got an incredible generation of artists there. You got like Bernie Wrightson. You got Plug. Some of those guys that worked on Saga, the Swamp Thing, like starts with a V, but it didn't coming to me. Like, how much like art inspiration sort of passed back and forth between these two mediums, like animation, 2D animation, and like comics, or.
Well, it varies. I mean, there are a lot of people that are into both, and it just depends. Yeah, at Disney there is less so of that.
Yeah.
At Disney, pretty much, I'd say the majority of people that worked at Disney in the animation department were just into Disney. Period. That's it. Their whole life revolved around Disney. Not saying everyone, but I'd say generally speaking, some of them, that was their only job throughout their entire career. They never worked anywhere else, and they had no interest beyond Disney.
Right.
But when I was working at Bakshi and other places like that, obviously there was a lot of back and forth and overlap. I mean, Ralph would often bring in comic artists to work, and we would often have inspired by him. I mean, that was the whole Frazetta thing too, for Fire and Ice, where he just wanted to make a film with Frazetta. And, originally, and I'm not positive, I wasn't there, but the Wizards thing was him. He was originally working that up with Wally Wood and Mark Bode, or I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, and a couple other comic artists at the time and stuff, underground comic artists. That was originally the incentive for that.
Like the Wallace Wood from EC from the 50s?
Yeah. And he was involved, I believe, that his version of the story, and I'm sure there are other versions, is that they were working together and eventually it fell through or whatever. I think Mark Bode died during the development, and then Ralph continued on and such, but I don't know exactly all the specifics. Like I said, that was before my time.
Yeah.
I was just a punk in high school at that time. So
we'll have those times. Yes. So what are you up to these days? What's been keeping you busy? I saw that you had a credit on the new Space Jam.
Yeah, that was my latest animation job, actually. I actually got to animate on that film, so that was nice. That was fun. I did some of the animation on Wolverine and few of the other characters like Bugs and Speedy and Vanny. And before that, I worked on, that was all digital animation, where we were working digitally.
Yeah.
As opposed to on paper with pencil and stuff. We were using our Cintiqs and stuff. But before that, I was actually doing paper animation for a friend of mine from Disney called Anastasia, who has got a short that may be out sometime soon. So we'll see. But other than that, what I do most of the time is do storyboarding. I storyboarded on the Troll Hunter movie that's on Netflix.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with Troll Hunters. It's a Guillermo del Toro property. There were like 3 different series, I guess, that came together in this movie, where they all came together and resolved the entire thing. And I've worked on the Addams Family 2 film, and that's coming out somewhat soon. And I'm trying to think what else. Bunch of stuff. Mostly storyboard. You work 6 months here, you work 6 months there, sometimes less, sometimes more. Stuff.
It's kind of incredible to look at it, just those 3 properties, the Space Jam, the Troll Hunter under Del Toro, who is this like visual fantasist. I mean, his universes are so ornate visually. Yeah. And doing something like the Addams Family, it's like you've got the Addams Family and the Warner Brothers thing, where you're kind of having to tackle the challenge of, you have characters, they have an established look, and you have to somehow keep that established look while also keeping them in a contemporary light. Like, how difficult is that a challenge to meet?
Well, for like Space Jam, because I'm not one of these guys who draw Looney Tunes all the time. There are some people that are perfect and wonderful at that. I mean, I'm more of a, I guess if you had to justify me, I'm more of a realist animator or Disney animator type. And I draw that way naturally, but thankfully there were some really good people that were following me up that could help me stay on model, make sure that I didn't stray too far and whatnot. So that helped considerably. But you kind of adapt. In this business, you adapt to project to project. Sometimes, like I was doing Troll Hunters, which is not realistic, but much more realistic and dramatic. And then, in a week's time after I finished that project, I was on Madagascar TV series where there were little babies, relatively. Speaking of Madagascar babies, yeah.
Madagascar babies. It all goes back to babies, whatever.
Yeah. Well, when you have a huge hit like Muppet Babies, everything comes back to us eventually. But,
that was crazy, and that show has never had a complete DVD release. I guess there's rights issues with all the clips and stuff they use. So.
That could be. Yeah, that may be. I hear that they're, and I thought I saw a CG test where they're actually, I think they're doing an updated version of Muppet Babies. So wouldn't surprise me.
That was crazy. That I remember that I was actually pretty little when that first came on television, and it ran forever.
Yeah,
Seems
no, that
like
was a huge hit show for a long
yeah.
time. It made some careers and stuff off that show.
Off of what, a minute and a half segment in The Muppets Take Manhattan, and it became this huge thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
For my generation, it was a giant thing. What is it? What is it like doing storyboards for Guillermo del Toro?
Well, I mean, it was pretty much the same as for anyone. He wasn't on site. He'd come in maybe once a month or something and kind of review stuff with the directors. So
Yeah.
I never even met him. So, but it was just basically any other dramatic show that I was working on. And, I'd have to work with the directors and such, but I wish, he'd been more involved with us, but, obviously he had other fish to fry and was making other features and live action features and whatnot.
He always seems to be a guy that's got 20 other things going on at the same time.
Yeah, I think he likes to keep a lot of plates spinning.
Yeah, he seems to, and he's such kind of a, I don't know if you'd say an innovator or into his own thing so much. It seems like a lot of his productions he has to fight just to see the light of day. Like he had a long going attempt to greenlight an adaptation of Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness that never happened. And if there was ever a guy who could probably pull that off, right?
Yeah, you'd think.
Yeah, but they wouldn't touch it, even when what Tom Cruise said he'd do it. So
yeah, you'd think that he could take any project he wanted and get it greenlit, but apparently that's not necessarily the case.
no, it was well, for me it was a bit of a kind of a crestfallen moment when what was it, Pacific Rim, his movie with the giant robots fighting monsters. It came out the exact same weekend as a some generic Adam Sandler man-child humor movie, and the Adam Sandler movie like was so successful. It's like, yeah, I get why, but still, that's kind of depressing.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, there's no predicting. I mean, well, I guess you can, but I mean, you can't always predict what the audience will do.
No.
And I'm sure they came out the same weekend thinking, well, it's a whole different audience. But is it?
Yeah.
Maybe it's the same audience. So
young males, what's going to get the young males in, and both of them are very young male skew audience.
Yeah.
So they always say there's counter programming, but sometimes you got to wonder. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times marketing and when something comes out means a lot more than actual quality of the production.
Yeah.
So if the marketers do their job and get butts into the seats on the first weekend, that makes all the difference. And then people can debate whether or not it's a good film that they saw.
Yeah.
So the second weekend.
The fight always seems to be that first weekend or two. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you want a really good, strong first weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least in traditional times, because usually it's going to drop off for the second weekend. And it's considered a hit if the film doesn't drop off before more than 45% or something.
Mm-hmm.
So the higher number you get for that first weekend, the better off you are overall.
Yeah. So it's interesting how the math works now. There was an interview I saw with the director John Carpenter a while back where they did that first Halloween movie, and the movie came out, and it wasn't something he was like super aware of. He made the movie, right, because he was supposed to make a movie, and it came out, and the numbers from the first week were like, eh. So he was like, it came out, it probably bombed, and he was on to whatever he was doing next, The Fog or whatever, and they came to him or TV movies, whatever he was doing, and they came to him like a year later, and they're like, so the people who studio was interested in working with you again because of the Halloween movie. He said, well, I thought we bombed, and they went, no, it just continued to perform for months and months and months. And it's kind of an interesting thing to think now, because years ago we used to see movies that did that. Yeah. And nowadays it's not something you see so much anymore. It's always tied into it's like tied into that first weekend, and if it drops a certain degree, then they sort of write it off, or
Sure. I mean, that's kind of this whole summer blockbuster thing. I mean, it wasn't necessarily that the film did great the first weekend, like a Star Wars or Jaws or something, but it did well enough, but it kept going.
Yeah.
And nowadays, movies are in theaters maybe a month, if that, much less, in those days they were in theaters for, God, that thing was in there for 6 months or half, more than a year, things would stay there. If they were making money, people would keep them in there.
And that's such a weird thing to think, because in both those cases, Jaws, Star Wars, Lucas and Spielberg, both of those guys are, you could almost credit them with sort of being architects of blockbuster cinema in a way. But
sure.
But their names were built on these films that had a quality that kept people coming for a while. Jaws was not a open and drop off movie. It played. Star Wars was too. So kind of interesting.
Yeah, they're responsible for that whole summer blockbuster thing. I think before them, there wasn't that type of theater experience.
No, not really.
Yeah.
It all came back to them, and ultimately other people refined it, but they started it. One thing that I saw on your website that I thought was really cool is that you have some work on there that's Tarzan, Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan.
Yeah.
So what are you doing with Tarzan?
Well, long time ago I did some storyboards for the TV show, but besides that, the Disney TV show. But what I had done is kind of taken a back door into doing print art, comic art, sequential art. And I did some work for Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. They have a website with a series of comics based all on Burroughs's books and stuff. And I was doing The Eternal Savage. And that was my strip for about a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. It was just online and stuff. It was supposed to eventually get printed by Dark Horse, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. But anyways, it was just like Sunday strips, eat one a week when I could manage it, 4 or 5 panels or whatever. And then I did that for, like I said, about a year and a half or so. And it was fun. It was nice. I grew up on Burroughs and stuff, so it was kind of a fun chance to do that. So
that great old pulp stuff like that. Burroughs, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard,
sure.
Conan and stuff. That stuff is like finding new audiences now. Where it's kind of interesting. It's almost like a generational thing where each generation sort of discovers Conan or the Cthulhu thing became a big pop culture thing, but sure. Some of these other things that aren't so rooted in the bizarre find their way back. Tarzan typically has a new version every generation.
Everyone keeps trying to reestablish that. I mean, the John Carter movie, Andrew Stanton, now I remember.
And that's it.
Reestablish. They try to establish John Carter as a franchise, but I think that fell into whole types of political mayhem or whatever else and whatnot. But unfortunately, I think a lot of the problem with John Carter is the bones have been picked pretty clean by every other franchise, including Star Wars and whatnot. So there wasn't much fresh or new about it to draw the audience in. So, but I think his stuff will remain, and they keep revisiting the books and stuff and whatnot. I gather they're trying to write more books in that universe, combining the characters or whatnot, kind of trying to create their Edgar Rice Burroughs universe, like the Marvel universe, and seeing how that goes. But I haven't read any of those. I don't know how they are or whatnot. So, but I give them credit for trying.
That's so weird when someone else comes, at the tails or after on a property and tries to go, well, this could be a really great franchise, and they pick it up and they try to run with it in their own way.
Yeah.
And parts like, I'd like to have more Tarzan or Conan stories, but on the other hand, you're not Robert E. Howard. You're not.
Yeah, it's hard to. Yeah, this is the Tarzan stuff is. Well, I don't know if it's all Tarzan, but the Burroughs stuff is being done by the Burroughs Corporation and stuff. So it's they're at the forefront of it. But I have no idea how it is. I mean, I hope it's good, but I haven't even read a Burroughs book in decades either. So it's
Mhm.
a long time. You know, I think I reread Eternal Savage before I started working on the strip, just to kind of get the flavor again and stuff. So, but I had to rely mostly on the writer of the strip to kind of guide me along and stuff. So,
I just found it kind of interesting, like the Tolkien estate. And I don't know if this is true, but it was said for a long time that after J.R.R. Tolkien passed away, that Christopher was presented with two options. He was presented with, we can attempt to do the books that your father planned with like a ghostwriter coming in to help write them, or you can do like this academic thing where you present the material and do that. And you know, one is the lucrative, one is less lucrative. And he went, I'm going to do the academic thing, and I'm not going to write on this. I don't feel that's right. And you know, they probably could have made what, millions, billions of dollars of just continuing with halflings and whatnot forever and ever and ever. And they chose the one that was the less profitable because it felt like the right answer. And
good for them, I think. Maybe they're regretting that decision. But then again, now after the movies, you know, I'm sure they're very happy. So
they ought to be happy that a lot came out of that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that those are very profitable for them anyways.
Yeah. Was there anything else you'd like to add today for our watchers, listeners?
Well, I mean, I'm not really doing much. I've got a store online that people can visit. Sounds like you visited it. If you go to Store Envy, I'm there, StephenEGordon.com. I don't know the exact address, but I'm easy to locate online. And I'm doing some Comic Cons coming up in December. I'm at the LA Comic Con and a Comic Con in Ontario, and I'm blanking on the name of what it is. Comic Con Revolution in Ontario, California. And that's about all I've got going on, other than my work that I do day in and day out. So nothing that I can talk about specifically because they're all under NDA. So
Right.
in big trouble if I say anything. So
the fun stuff.
Yeah.
It must always stink when you have something that's really exciting to work on, but an NDA lives over your head. Right.
Yeah.
I want to talk about this, but I can't because.
Oh, yeah. And you know, it's eventually you get to talk about it when they say it's okay. When they start promoting it, it's like, okay, now I can tell people I worked on that. So it's not, you don't want to let it out of the back before they do.
Yeah.
We'll get very unhappy.
Well, friends and neighbors out there, be sure to visit Stephen at StephenEGordon.com. It is a beautiful website, might I add. Wow. You know, it's funny. You still see stuff out there. It looks like GeoCities. Your website is not that.
No, I just had it redone actually about a year or so ago.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty happy with how it looks right now. So
beautiful. Well, thank you very much, and you have a great day.
You too. Take it easy.